This is a story from my own life, something I've held inside for over a decade. It's not easy to talk about, but it's time. The truth always finds its way to the surface, one way or another. The cold, hard weight of the bronze award in my hand felt heavier than it should, its polished surface reflecting the glittering skyline of London. My mother, standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, was holding her phone up, her voice a syrupy sweet performance for our relatives back in Ohio. "Isn't it breathtaking?" she cooed, panning the camera across the view. "My Alara, she's a genius. Of course, I always knew she would be." I watched her reflection in the glass, a perfectly manicured predator in her natural habitat, and heard her whisper to my aunt, a conspiratorial aside she thought I couldn't hear. "It's a good thing I put my foot down all those years ago. That silly art school dream would have ruined her." If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. It all started in Parma, Ohio, in a house that smelled perpetually of pot roast and quiet disappointment. Our neighborhood was a grid of tidy lawns and identical two-story colonials, a place where dreams went to die peacefully in their sleep. My dream, however, was screaming to get out. Since I was old enough to hold a crayon, I wanted to be a designer. Not just any designer. I wanted to create spaces that felt like they had a soul. I spent my teenage years sketching, building models out of cardboard, and devouring every book on architecture and interior design I could find at the Parma Snow Branch Library. My bedroom walls were a collage of magazine cutouts of buildings in London, Paris, and Tokyo, a constant reminder of the world that existed beyond the Cuyahoga County line. My mother, Carol, saw my passion as a frivolous hobby. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, a tight, dismissive smile on her face as she glanced at a new blueprint I'd painstakingly drawn. "But you need a real career, something stable, like nursing or teaching." Carol was a master of passive aggression, a puppeteer who pulled strings of guilt and obligation so subtly you didn't realize you were dancing to her tune until it was too late. To the outside world, she was the perfect mother, president of the PTA, a volunteer at the church, the kind of woman who brought a casserole to a grieving neighbor. In private, she was a suffocating fog of control, her love conditional upon my compliance. My father was the opposite. He was my quiet champion. A mechanic with calloused hands and a gentle heart, he saw the fire in my eyes and nurtured it. He'd bring me scraps of wood and metal from his garage, his silent offerings fueling my creativity. "Don't let anyone tell you your dreams are too big, Ellie girl," he'd murmur, his voice a low rumble. "Especially not if you're the one who has to live with them." His death from a sudden heart attack when I was 17 was like a switch being flipped. The small pocket of warmth and encouragement in our house vanished, replaced by the chilling draft of my mother's amplified control. She used her grief as a weapon and a shield. Any attempt I made to assert my independence was met with tearful accusations. "How can you think of leaving me? After all I've been through? After your father is gone?" But I had a plan. One plan. A single gleaming beacon of hope. The Sterling Fellowship at the prestigious Royal College of Art in London. It was a long shot, a 1 in a million chance. The fellowship covered full tuition and living expenses for 4 years. It wasn't just a scholarship. It was an escape hatch. For 6 months, I poured every ounce of my being into my portfolio. I worked late into the night at the dining room table, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer desperation. My mother would walk by, her lips pursed in disapproval. "You're wasting your time, Alara. You'll only be disappointed. You're a Parma girl. You belong here." The day I mailed the portfolio, I felt a tremor of hope so profound it made me dizzy. The application process was grueling. There were essays, interviews over Skype with stern-faced professors, and weeks of agonizing silence. I tracked the mail every single day. The mailman, a cheerful guy named Dave, knew my entire life story by the time April rolled around. The waiting was the worst part, My life felt like it was paused, hovering in a gray limbo between the suffocating reality of Ohio and the technicolor dream of London. My mother seemed to revel in my anxiety. "Don't get your hopes up," she'd chirp over dinner. "Rejection builds character." Then, one Tuesday in May, it arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope with the Royal College of Art crest embossed in the corner. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would break through. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of my life. I stood in the driveway, the sun warm on my face, the envelope trembling in my hands. I remember the smell of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of a lawnmower. I took a deep breath and walked inside. My mother was in the kitchen, wiping down the already spotless counters. She looked up, her eyes immediately locking onto the envelope. A strange, unreadable expression flickered across her face before settling into a mask of maternal concern. "Well?" she asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Open it." I sat down at the kitchen table, my fingers fumbling with the seal. I slid out the heavy cardstock, my eyes scanning the first line. The words blurred, then sharpened into a brutal, "Final judgment. We regret to inform you." The rest of the letter was a haze of polite corporate speak about the unprecedented number of highly qualified applicants. But the message was clear. I hadn't made it. The dream was dead. A hollow, cavernous feeling opened up in my chest. I felt the floor drop out from under me, leaving me in a freefall. I couldn't breathe. The vibrant future I had meticulously designed in my mind dissolved into gray dust. My mother was there instantly, her arms wrapping around me in a cloying embrace. "Oh, my poor baby," she crooned, stroking my hair. Her sympathy felt like sandpaper on raw skin. "I told you not to get your hopes up. The world is a tough place. But don't you worry. Mama's here. You're safe here with me." Her words, meant to be comforting, sounded like a life sentence. As I sobbed into her shoulder, a tiny, cold part of my brain registered something odd. Through my tears, I could feel the rhythmic patting of her hand on my back. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was triumphant. The years that followed were a study in muted desperation. The light inside me flickered and died. I abandoned my art, packing away my sketches and models into dusty boxes in the attic as if burying a part of myself. I enrolled in a local community college and got a certificate in medical billing, just as my mother suggested. It was stable. It was practical. It was soul-crushing. My days were a monotonous loop of beige cubicles, insurance codes, and the hum of fluorescent lights at a clinic in Cleveland. My evenings were spent in my childhood bedroom, the ghosts of my London dreams mocking me from the walls before I finally tore them down. I ate dinner with my mother every night, listening to her endless monologues about neighborhood gossip and her church friends. I was a ghost in my own life, a daughter playing the part of the dutiful, failed dreamer who had wisely returned to the fold. My mother blossomed in my failure. She paraded my sensible career choice to her friends and family. "Alara is so practical," she'd boast over the phone. She had this silly little dream of being an artist, but she realized that family and stability are what truly matter. "She's so mature." I'd sit there listening, the words like little paper cuts on my soul. She was crafting a narrative where she was the wise, guiding mother, and I was the flighty child she had saved from her own foolish ambitions. The rest of our family bought it completely. My aunts and cousins would pat my arm sympathetically at family gatherings. "It's for the best, dear. London is so dangerous and far away. Your mother needs you." I became a prop in her story, the living embodiment of her maternal wisdom. The resentment festered inside me, a toxic sludge I couldn't seem to purge. 5 years passed. 5 years of beige. 5 years of biting my tongue until it bled. I was 23, but I felt ancient. Then something shifted. My mother decided to sell the house. She was downsizing to a condo in a retirement community, one with a very active social committee she was already campaigning to lead. The move required us to clean out the attic, and that's where I found it. The attic was a dusty mausoleum of our family's history. Old photo albums, my father's fishing gear, holiday decorations. We spent a weekend sorting through forgotten treasures and junk. On the second day, I was clearing out my old desk, a cheap particle board thing I'd had since I was 10. I pulled out the bottom drawer, which had been stuck for years. It came loose with a shutter, revealing a space behind it. Tucked deep in the back was a yellowed, forgotten manila folder. Curious, I opened it. Inside were old report cards, a few sentimental drawings, and another cream-colored envelope. This one, however, wasn't from the Royal College of Art. It was from a bank, First Federal of Ohio. It was addressed to me, but it had been opened. Inside was a bank statement from 6 years ago, for a savings account I never knew I had. There was only one transaction listed. A deposit, dated May 2nd, the week before I received my rejection letter. A wire transfer from an international account. The amount made the air rush from my lungs. It was for $25,000. The memo line contained just 4 words. Sterling Fellowship. First installment. I stood there in the dusty, suffocating heat of the attic, the statement trembling in my hand. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. A fellowship installment? But I was rejected. I looked at the next line. A withdrawal dated 2 days later. The entire $25,000 transferred to another account. The account number was sickeningly familiar. It was my mother's primary checking account, the world tilted on its axis. The past 5 years of my life, the grayness, the failure, the suffocating sense of being trapped, rearranged themselves into a horrifying new mosaic. The rejection letter. Her triumphant comfort, her constant reminders of my failure. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a heist. I stumbled down the attic ladder, my heart pounding a sick, frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt strangely calm, the way you do in the eye of a hurricane. My mother was in the living room, carefully wrapping a porcelain figurine in newspaper. "Mom," I said, my voice eerily steady. "What was the Sterling Fellowship?" She didn't look up from her task. "Oh, that was that art thing you were so obsessed with in high school. The one you didn't get. It's a shame, but it all worked out for the best, didn't it?" "Did it?" I asked, walking closer. I held out the bank statement. Because according to this, I did get it. Or at least, the first payment came through. She glanced at the paper, and for a fleeting second, the mask slipped. I saw it, pure, unadulterated panic. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, replaced by a look of bewildered offense. She stood up, snatching the paper from my hand. "What is this nonsense?" She scoffed, her voice rising in pitch. "This must be some kind of bank error. You're dredging up old disappointments, Alara. It's not healthy." "The money, Mom. The $25,000. It was wired into an account in my name and then transferred to yours 2 days later." "Explain it." "I don't have to explain anything," she snapped, her face flushing a blotchy red. "I am your mother. I've only ever done what's best for you. You were a child. You would have been eaten alive in a city like London all alone. I protected you." The confession hung in the air, naked and ugly. She didn't deny it. She justified it. She had stolen my future, my dream, my very identity, and repackaged it as an act of maternal love. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. She had watched me grieve for a life she had murdered. She had comforted me with the very hands that had cashed the check. "You didn't protect me," I whispered, the words like shards of glass in my throat. "You caged me." Her face hardened, the faux concern melting away to reveal the cold, hard narcissism beneath. "You are being dramatic and incredibly ungrateful. After everything I've sacrificed for you, I put a roof over your head. I fed you. This is how you repay me?" With these wild, hateful accusations. She knew exactly what to do. She immediately went on the offensive, weaving a narrative of my instability and her victimhood. She called my Aunt Carol, her voice choked with crocodile tears. "Alara's not well," she sobbed into the phone. "She's saying the most terrible things that I stole from her. I think losing her father finally broke her." Within an hour, my phone was ringing. My aunt, my uncle, my cousins, they all called with the same script, a script written and directed by my mother. Your mom is worried sick. You need to apologize. How could you say such a thing to the woman who gave you life? They didn't want the truth. They wanted the comfortable, easy story they had been fed for years. My mother, the saint. Me, the troubled, ungrateful daughter. I was completely and utterly alone, trapped in a prison of lies she had been building my entire life. She hadn't just stolen my money and my future. She had stolen my voice, my credibility, my entire family. That night, as I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, the last embers of grief and shock burned away, leaving behind something new. It was cold and hard and sharp. It was rage. A pure, clean, clarifying rage. My mother thought she had won, that she had buried my dream so deep it could never be resurrected. She thought she had all the power. She was wrong. She hadn't buried my dream. She had just given me a new one. Revenge. And unlike my last one, I would build this one with my own 2 hands, brick by painful brick, until it was big enough to cast a shadow so dark it would swallow her whole world. The war had begun. I just hadn't fired my first shot yet. The next morning, I woke up with a chilling clarity. The fog of grief and confusion had lifted, replaced by an unnerving sense of purpose. I walked downstairs to find my mother humming in the kitchen, acting as if nothing had happened. It was her classic move: create a firestorm, then pretend she was the one who put it out. I made your favorite blueberry pancakes, she said, her voice bright and brittle. It was a peace offering, a demand for me to return to the status quo. I walked past her to the coffee pot and poured myself a cup, my hand perfectly steady. I'm moving out, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. She dropped the spatula with a clatter. Don't be ridiculous, Alara. Where would you even go? The question wasn't one of concern. It was a statement of fact. In her mind, I had nowhere else to go. I was her satellite, trapped in her gravitational pull. That's no longer your concern, I replied, taking a sip of coffee. I looked her directly in the eye. I'm going to London. The color drained from her face. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. It was intoxicating. With what money? She stammered. You can't afford that. Be sensible. I'll figure it out, I said. You taught me the importance of being resourceful. That week was a blur of calculated action. I packed a single suitcase with my most essential belongings. I went to the bank and closed my local account, withdrawing the few $1,000s I had painstakingly saved from my medical billing job. It was a pathetic amount, nowhere near enough, but it was a start. I found the original folder from my fellowship application, the one with the contact information for the administrator, a woman named Eleanor Vance. I knew I couldn't prove the theft in a way that would stand up legally without a protracted and ugly battle, but I didn't need a courtroom. My stage would be much grander. My last conversation with my mother before I left was surreal. She had switched tactics from aggression to pleading. Tears streamed down her face as I stood by the front door with my suitcase. You're abandoning me, she wept. Your own mother. I'll be all alone. You were the one who taught me that sometimes you have to cut things out of your life to be healthy, I said, the words cold and precise. You were just talking about a dream. I'm talking about a person. I walked out the door and didn't look back. I took a bus to Cleveland Hopkins International Airport and bought a one-way ticket to London. The moment the plane lifted off the runway, breaking through the gray Ohio clouds, I felt a profound sense of release. I wasn't running away from something. I was flying towards myself. Landing at Heathrow was like taking my first breath. The city was a chaotic, overwhelming, glorious symphony of sounds and smells. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. But the reality was brutal. My savings dwindled with alarming speed. I found a tiny, damp room to rent in a shared flat in Brixton, so small I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. The glamour of London was a world away from my reality of instant noodles and threadbare towels. I took any job I could find. I washed dishes in a greasy pub kitchen until my hands were raw. I cleaned hotel rooms, scrubbing other people's filth while my own dreams gathered dust. I worked as a barista, forcing a smile for cheerful tourists as a deep, corrosive bitterness ate away at me. Every single day was a struggle for survival. There were moments of profound despair, nights spent huddled under a thin blanket, listening to the rain and the sirens, wondering if my mother had been right after all. But then I would remember her face. The flicker of panic, the smug justification. And the rage would return, a welcome fire in the cold, damp room. It was fuel. I started sketching again, on napkins at the coffee shop, on the back of receipts. I bought a cheap, second-hand laptop and began teaching myself advanced design software through online tutorials, often staying up all night after a grueling 12-hour shift. I reached out to Eleanor Vance at the Royal College of Art, not as an accuser, but as a prospective student. I explained that I had been a fellowship finalist years ago but had to defer due to a family emergency. It was a lie, but it was a more palatable one than the truth. She was kind and remembered my name, a small miracle that felt like a lifeline. She couldn't offer me a place, but she gave me advice. Build a new contemporary portfolio and apply again. And she gave me a name, a former colleague who now ran a small independent design firm. So I did. I spent every spare moment and every spare pound on my portfolio. I used the vibrant, gritty streets of London as my inspiration. I designed community spaces, sustainable housing, pop-up art galleries. My work was no longer the hopeful, naive art of a teenager. It was forged in struggle, infused with the resilience and anger that had become my constant companions. It was better. It was stronger. I sent my new portfolio to the design firm, and I waited. It was a familiar, agonizing feeling. But this time it was different. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't waiting for a golden ticket. I was fighting. A week later, I got an email. They wanted to see me for an internship interview. It was unpaid. It was demanding. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever read. The internship was my way in. I worked for free during the day and served coffee at night. I was perpetually exhausted, running on fumes and ambition. But for the first time in years, I was happy. I was learning, I was creating, I was in my element. The head of the firm, a notoriously difficult but brilliant designer named Julian Croft, saw the hunger in me. He started giving me small, then larger responsibilities. Meanwhile, my mother's emails continued to arrive, a steady drip of emotional poison. They were masterpieces of manipulation, swinging wildly between guilt-tripping, "I hope you're happy," all alone in that big city while your mother worries herself sick, and passive-aggressive bragging about her new life in the condo. "Everyone here is so lovely." Carol from 3B says she can't imagine her children ever moving so far away. I never responded. My silence was my weapon. It drove her insane not to know what I was doing, not to have any control over my narrative. After 6 months, Julian called me into his office. He told me the internship was over. My heart sank. But then he slid a contract across the table. "We're offering you a junior designer position," he said, his expression stern. "The pay is terrible. The hours are worse, but you've got guts. And a damn good eye." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. It was the first brick, the foundation of the life I was going to build. As I walked home that night through the glittering streets of London, I wasn't a dishwasher or a barista anymore. I was a designer. I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, the monuments to ambition and steel, and I made a silent promise to myself. One day I would have a view from the top of one of them, and when I did, she would be there to see it. The next few years were a relentless climb. The world of high-end London design was a shark tank, and I learned to swim fast. I worked harder than everyone else. I arrived earliest, I stayed latest. I took on the projects nobody wanted and turned them into portfolio showpieces. My style evolved, becoming known for its clean, minimalist aesthetic combined with a surprising emotional warmth. a balance of the cold anger that drove me and the deep-seated yearning for the comfort I never had. Success came in increments, not a landslide. A small residential project that got featured in a local design magazine. A commercial contract for a trendy new restaurant in Soho. My name started to get passed around. I moved from the shared flat in Brixton to a small but sunny studio in Islington. I could finally afford to buy new clothes, to eat at the restaurants I was designing, to live a life that wasn't just about survival. Through it all, I maintained my wall of silence with my mother. Her emails eventually slowed to a trickle, replaced by attempts to gather information through my relatives. I'd get awkward calls from cousins. "So, what are you up to over there?" "Your mom's just curious." I remained polite but vague, offering them nothing she could use. I was a ghost to her, a blank page she couldn't write on. I knew this lack of information, this loss of control, was a unique form of torture for a narcissist. My big break came from an unexpected place. A tech billionaire from California, who had made his fortune in some arcane corner of Silicon Valley, bought a historic, dilapidated warehouse in Shoreditch with the intention of converting it into a cutting-edge, live workspace. Every major firm in London was vying for the contract. It was an impossible long shot for a junior designer at a boutique firm, but I was obsessed. I spent a month doing nothing but researching the man, his company, his aesthetic, the history of the building. I didn't just design a space. I designed a story. My proposal went beyond blueprints and fabric swatches. It was a narrative about bridging London's industrial past with its technological future. I practically moved into the office, sleeping on a couch in the break room, fueled by caffeine and an almost manic creative energy. Julian thought I was insane, but he let me run with it. When the day of the presentation came, I walked into a boardroom filled with titans of the industry, old men in bespoke suits who looked at me like I was a catering assistant. But I knew my material cold. I didn't just present a design, I presented a vision. 2 weeks later, Julian called me into his office. He looked stunned. "We got it," he said, his voice a disbelieving whisper. He didn't want the big names. He wanted you. That project changed everything. It was a massive 2-year undertaking that nearly broke me, but the result was a triumph. It won a slew of architectural awards and was featured in design magazines all over the world. Suddenly, I wasn't just a designer. I was a name. Offers started pouring in. It was time to make my next move. I left Julian's firm on good terms, and with a sizable loan secured by my newfound reputation, I started my own. I called it Ellie Vance Design, a nod to the woman at the college who had offered a small kindness when I needed it most, and a silent, bitter jab at the mother who had tried to erase me. The Ellie was for my father, his private name for me. It was a company built from ghosts and grit. The firm was an immediate success. I was selective, taking on only projects that inspired me. I built a small, brilliant team. We designed luxury hotels in Dubai, art galleries in Berlin, and private residences for the kind of people who valued privacy and perfection above all else. The money, when it came, felt like an abstraction. It was never about the wealth. It was about the power. It was about building a fortress so high my mother would never be able to touch me again. 5 years after starting my firm, I bought the penthouse. It was at the top of a new, sleek residential tower in Canary Wharf, with a panoramic view that stretched from the Thames Barrier to the Houses of Parliament. It was an absurdly opulent space of glass, steel, and Italian marble. It was cold, beautiful, and empty. It was perfect. Once I was settled, I knew it was time. Time to break my 8 years of silence. Time to set the trap. I sat down at my custom-made walnut desk, overlooking the city I now considered my own, and I composed an email. It was short and simple. Subject: a surprise, dear Mom. It's been a long time. I have something I want to show you. I've booked you a first-class ticket to London for your 65th birthday. It's non-refundable. The ticket is attached. See you soon. Ilare attached the flight confirmation and hit send. The bait was in the water. I knew a narcissist's ego and curiosity were a potent combination. The thought of being able to tell her friends that her estranged, successful daughter was flying her first class to London would be irresistible. She wouldn't be able to refuse the chance to co-opt my success as her own. The game was finally entering its final act. My mother's arrival was a masterclass in performative affection. The moment she stepped through the arrivals gate at Heathrow, she threw her arms around me, a dramatic, weeping display for the benefit of any onlookers. "Oh, my baby!" she cried loud enough for half the terminal to hear. "I've missed you so much. I knew you'd come back to your mother eventually." I didn't hug her back. I stood there stiffly, an immovable object, until she awkwardly disengaged. I led her to the waiting car service, my silence a stark contrast to her bubbly, incessant chatter. She marveled at everything, her eyes wide with a mixture of genuine awe and avaricious assessment. She was already calculating the story she would spin for her friends back in Parma. The moment we walked into the penthouse, she fell silent. Her jaw literally dropped. She walked slowly from one end of the massive open-plan living area to the other, her hand trailing over the cool marble of the kitchen island, her eyes sweeping over the bespoke furniture and the priceless view. The silence was heavy with everything unsaid between us. It was the silence of my stolen dream, now made manifest in glass and steel. Then the performance began again. "Oh, Alara," she breathed, turning to me with tears in her eyes. "It's magnificent. I am so proud of you. I always knew you had it in you. Sometimes a mother knows best. A little push in the right direction is all a child needs." The audacity was breathtaking. She was already rewriting history, positioning herself not as the saboteur, but as the secret architect of my success. I just smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm glad you like it, Mom. Make yourself at home." For the next 2 days, I was the perfect host. I took her to exclusive restaurants, on private tours of galleries, to the theater. She soaked it all up, posting constantly on social media, each photo captioned with some variation of "Ow, proud mom" or "London life." She was building her narrative, brick by brick, for her audience back home. I let her. I encouraged it. The evening of her birthday, I told her I had arranged a special surprise. "The whole family wants to wish you a happy birthday," I explained. "I've set up a video call so everyone can see you here in London." Her face lit up. This was the pinnacle, the ultimate validation. To be seen, live from her daughter's luxurious London penthouse, by the very people whose opinions she valued above all else. She spent 2 hours getting ready, putting on her best dress and a full face of makeup. As I set up the call, connecting my laptop to the massive 85-inch television that dominated one wall, my hands were perfectly steady, but my heart was a frantic drum. I had spent years planning this moment, this single devastating checkmate. I had placed my phone, set to record audio, discreetly behind a vase on the kitchen island. Earlier that afternoon, while she thought I was in the shower, I had listened as she made a call to her sister, my Aunt Linda, and she had delivered the line I had been waiting a decade to hear. Her voice, dripping with smug satisfaction, was captured in perfect clarity. "Of course I'm proud," she had said. "It all worked out for the best. Honestly, Linda, if I hadn't torn up that first acceptance letter and cashed that check, she'd have ended up a starving artist in some dirty flat. I saved her from herself. She just doesn't know how to thank me for it." Now, as the faces of my aunts, uncles, and cousins populated the screen, my mother sat on the white leather sofa like a queen holding court. She was glowing, basking in their adoration. "Carol, you look marvelous. That apartment is unbelievable. Tell us everything." She launched into her well-rehearsed monologue, detailing her grand London adventure, subtly taking credit for my achievements. I let her talk for a full 15 minutes, letting her dig her own grave. Then, I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you all for joining," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through her story. "It means so much to have you all here for Mom's birthday. And to celebrate, I put together a little trip down memory lane, a tribute to the woman who made me who I am today. I dimmed the lights with a remote, and the screen flickered to life. My mother beamed, expecting a heartwarming slideshow of childhood photos. And that's how it began. Pictures of me as a baby, a little girl on a swing, a teenager at her prom. Murmurs of awe came from the screen. Then, the image changed. On the screen, in high-resolution clarity, was the forged rejection letter from the Royal College of Art. A collective. Confused silence fell over the virtual room. Many of you know my story, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, silent penthouse. You know I was rejected from my dream school, that I gave up my silly dream to pursue a more sensible career. That's the story I was told. The story we were all told. The image on the screen changed again. It was the bank statement, showing the $25,000 deposit. I had blown it up, highlighting the memo line, Sterling Fellowship First Installment. But the truth, I continued. My eyes locked on my mother, whose face had gone rigid, the color draining from her cheeks, is that I was accepted. I was awarded a full fellowship. The money was sent, another image. The second bank statement, showing the withdrawal. An arrow pointed from the transfer outline to a box containing my mother's account number. Gasps were audible from the television's speakers. The money was stolen, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. My acceptance was hidden from me. A rejection was forged. My dream wasn't lost. It was sabotaged. And I think it's time we all heard the truth from the architect herself. And then I played the recording. My mother's voice filled the room, crisp and clear. If I hadn't torn up that first acceptance letter and cashed that check, she'd have ended up a starving artist. I saved her from herself. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a dense, heavy, suffocating thing. Every face on the screen was frozen in a state of shock and horror, their eyes darting between me and the crumbling figure on my sofa. My mother stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. The mask was gone. There was no charm, no maternal warmth. There was only the ugly, pathetic truth of a petty, jealous woman. The carefully constructed world she had built around herself, the reputation she had spent a lifetime curating, had been leveled to the ground in less than 5 minutes. I walked over to the laptop and ended the video call, plunging the room into an even deeper silence. I turned to look at the woman on my couch. She looked small now, shrunken and old. My flight back to Cleveland is booked for you, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a surgeon announcing a time of death. It leaves in 3 hours. A car will be here in 30 minutes to take you to the airport. Get out of my house. She finally found her voice, a weak, reedy whimper. Alara, please, get out. She stumbled to her feet and shuffled towards the guest room where her suitcase was, her entire body trembling. I didn't watch her go. I walked over to the massive wall of glass and looked out at the city lights, a sprawling galaxy of diamonds laid out at my feet. I had won. The revenge was total, the victory absolute. She was exposed, humiliated, and utterly destroyed in the eyes of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had bled for. When I heard the front door click shut, the sound was deafening in the silence. The battle was over. The war was won. I was free. I stood there for a long time, watching the endless river of headlights flowing through the dark city, a queen in her silent, glittering castle. The end.